Chapter 20 of A Crown of Straw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tom Shoesmith. A Crown of Straw by Alan Upward. Chapter 20. The Second Warning. My dear Dorothea, surely you are not the one person in the court who has failed to observe the king's state of mind. I thought you had better opportunities than any of us for knowing the truth. Dorothea shrank back and trembled, lifting her eyes helplessly to the scornful face of the speaker. The bitter feelings of jealousy towards Dorothea, which had been nursed in the breast of Gertrude von Sigismark for so long, had at last found utterance. Emboldened by the disclosure made to her by the Chancellor on the day before, to expect the momentary downfall of the king, to be followed by the dismissal from court of her young rival, she no longer thought it worthwhile to place any restraint on her feelings, nor could she resist the pleasure of being the first to crush Dorothea with the news of her royal lover's fate. But Dorothea had no thoughts to give to the taunts of her enemy. Her whole mind was absorbed in anxiety on behalf of the king. "I do not believe it," she cried passionately. "His Majesty is perfectly well. I will go and ask the princess if what you say is true." And before the dismayed Gertrude could stop her, Dorothea, flushed and weeping, went in and fell on her knees before her mistress. "What's the matter, my child?" inquired the princess, her stern face relaxing with sympathy. "Oh, madam, is it true what they're saying?" the girl faltered out. "Do people really think the king is going mad?" Hermengarde's face instantly grew black. "Who has been telling you that?" she demanded, so wrathfully that Dorothea was frightened afresh. "The Lady Gertrude von Sigismark said so," she responded, trembling. She didn't add anything as to Gertrude's ill nature towards herself, but Hermengarde was quick to perceive what had taken place. "The vain, insolent minx," she muttered between her teeth. Then, speaking more gently, she replied to Dorothea, "I am ashamed of Lady Gertrude. Her jealousy completely blinds her. You must pay no attention to what she says. I have seen for some time that she was irritated at the friendship the king and I have shown you, but I did not think she would dare to indulge her ill feeling in such a manner. What she has said is high treason, and I shall rebuke her severely for it, and so will the Chancellor. As for you, my dear child, depend on me. Whatever happens, always remember that Hermengarde of Schwerin-Strelitz is your friend, not because the king admires you, but in spite of it." She stooped to bestow a caress on the agitated girl, and then added, "Now go and tell the Lady Gertrude I desire her attendance immediately, and be careful not to breathe a word of this to anyone else." She dismissed Dorothea, who found Gertrude outside and conveyed Hermengarde's message to her. Gertrude received the summons in silence, and sullenly proceeded into the presence of the princess, feeling no slight dread as to her reception. Her dread was amply justified, and before she re-emerged, she was made to feel that it would have been better for her to have bitten her tongue than made her ill-timed display of spite. But, as the princess feared might be the case, the incident did not end there. A few hours after, Dorothea, wandering in the gardens by herself, came upon Johann Mark. Her first impulse was to turn and avoid him, as she had done ever since their quarrel on the night of the ball, but the next moment she made up her mind to sacrifice her own personal feelings in the interests of Maximilian. She therefore walked straight up to her cousin, and at once began, "Cousin Johann, I have something very serious to tell you about the king. He is in danger." Johann had assumed an air of some severity on the first appearance of his cousin, which he altered into condescension on her coming up, as he thought, to make friends with him. But directly he heard what she had to say, all thoughts of their quarrel were forgotten. "What is it?" he cried anxiously. "Do you mean the socialist demonstrations?" "No, I have not heard anything about socialists. It is something far worse than that, Johann." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell me, have you ever heard it rumored that the king was going mad?" He started back in alarm. The very suggestion which had been made to him a short time before by Maximilian's most intimate friend and favorite. Was it possible that Dorothea, too, had been infected by the base fear? "Certainly not," he exclaimed indignantly. "He is as sane as any man in Germany. Do you mean to say that you have dared to suspect such a thing?" "Oh, no," protested Dorothea earnestly. Never for one instant have I thought of it. But, and that's why I wanted to consult you, I am afraid the king has enemies who think that his mind is giving way, and who reckon on his not being allowed to reign much longer. Johann smote his breast. Infamous, infamous, was all he could say at first. But who are these enemies? He added, turning quickly to his cousin. I do not know. I know nothing beyond the fact that someone spoke to me this morning, almost threatening me with what I have said, as if it were certain to come to pass. Who was it that spoke to you? I hardly know whether I have right to say. You must, for the king's sake, Dorothea. Well, it was the Lady Gertrude von Sigismark. Von Sigismark, the Chancellor's daughter! Johann ground his teeth together. That name revealed all. He pondered for a minute. I understand everything now, he said at length. You have done the greatest service in telling me this. Heaven grant it may not be too late. This is evidently some plot to dethrone the king, because he has dared to take up the cause of the people, and I am responsible for this. It is the result of my coming to Neustadt. Well, I must save him, that's all. There is not a moment to be lost. I will warn him at once, and as soon as I have put him on his guard, I will go to Mannhausen and expose the whole plot to the people. Dorothea stood listening intently, her cheeks flushed with admiration for the young man's energy and resolution. He noticed her emotion, and a new thought occurred to him. But, Dorothea, he said inquiringly, surely you must have come to love the king at last, since you are so much concerned about him. She dropped her head quickly. No, Johann, you do not understand me. I shall never love him. I wish you would see that I am just what you are to him, a devoted friend, and nothing more. Then it is true, pursued her cousin, feeling his way delicately, that there is someone else? Yes, said Dorothea, blushing. It's true. And do you still object to tell me who it is? Dorothea looked at him gravely. Some day, perhaps, I shall tell you, she said, and she turned hastily and ran away, leaving Johann with a sense of disappointment which he could not quite analyze, and which continued to trouble him in the midst of his anxieties about the king. His first step was to return to the palace, where he made his way straight to Maximilian's apartments. On the threshold he was met by Karl. "Tell His Majesty I ask to see him immediately," he said abruptly. "His Majesty has given strict orders that he is not to be disturbed by anyone," was the glib answer. Johann stamped his foot. "Go at once, and tell His Majesty that I ask to see him on a matter of life and death." "Wait here, then, and I will try what I can do." Karl disappeared and was absent for a minute, during which the Republican impatiently paced the corridor. Karl returned, looking obstinate. "His Majesty is very sorry, but he cannot possibly receive you." Johann darted a look at the minion which made him quail. "Go and tell the king that I demand an audience in the name of the people." "I dare not." Johann drew back and made a sign which the other had seen him make once before on a memorable occasion. He submitted at once. "Well, I will try again, but I warn you it will be useless." He again went inside. After a somewhat longer absence he came back and said stolidly, "His Majesty cannot see you now. You can come later in the day." "I will not wait. Go back and tell His Majesty that 1 hour is worth his kingdom." Karl withdrew, shaking in every limb, and Johann waited, breathing hard and with the sweat breaking out on his forehead. When Karl came back this time he was no longer alone. August Bernal accompanied him, looking pale and concerned. The composer drew Johann aside and whispered in his ear, "Herr Mark, I implore you not to come into the king just now. He is extremely ill, so ill, in fact, that I fear the least excitement might produce a terrible paroxysm. You understand, I dare not let this be known to a soul except yourself." Johann's face became ghastly as he listened. He searched the other's face as if he would read his very heart, but finally he bowed his head and went away, with his limbs trembling beneath him. Hardly had the sound of his footsteps died away when Maximilian's voice was heard from inside, sounding calm as usual. "Does anyone want to see me, Auguste?" Bernal and Karl exchanged dark glances, and the former hastened back inside. Hermengarde's sentinels had done their work. Johann lost no more time. He hastened to the stable, ordered a horse to be saddled instantly on the king's business, and galloped off at full speed towards the distant railway station. As he drew up to the top of the hill which separated the enchanted valley from the outer world, he saw a state carriage, drawn by 4 horses with postilions, drive rapidly through the archway which guarded the royal demesne, and come swinging down past him towards the castle. Hardly had he gained the gateway himself than another similar carriage drew up. A person closely wrapped up leant out of the window and gave a password to the officer in charge of the gate, and this carriage followed on after its predecessor. Behind, at a little distance, Johann could see a 3rd carriage rolling swiftly up the long road which led from the station. He checked his horse under the archway, and asked with affected carelessness of the officer, "Who was that man who spoke to you from the carriage?" The officer looked at Johann, and appeared to recognize him. His position in the king's favor had hitherto naturally led to deference on the part of the underlings of the court, but on this occasion the officer's manner was brusque, almost to rudeness. "That was the Privy Councillor von Layern, Hermengarde. Ride on, if you please. I have no instructions to stop you." Johann started violently, and his horse gave a plunge. He pulled the rein to turn around. "Stop!" cried the officer, noticing the action. "I have instructions to prevent your returning, unless you give me the password." And he deliberately drew a revolver. Johann gave a groan, and setting spurs to his horse, dashed madly on down the road. As he did so, the 3rd carriage came up, halted a moment, and then rolled on beneath the frowning gateway, and was lost to view. Johann had been seen to leave the castle by Bernal. Satisfied that the coast was now clear, he repaired to the presence of the Princess Hermengarde, whom he found anxiously awaiting an intimation that the Privy Council was in session. As he entered her apartments, Prince Ernest went out, looking strangely disturbed. His mother had just taken the same step with regard to him which the Chancellor had been rash enough to take with regard to Gertrude. But Hermengarde had delayed imparting the secret till the last moment, and it was indispensable that her son's mind should be prepared before the conspiracy actually took effect. Knowing his fondness for Maximilian, she dared not give the boy any idea of the motives which were really at work in her mind, but spoke to him as if his cousin's madness were a fact which she had been forced reluctantly to believe in by convincing medical testimony. Ernest received the terrible revelation with a strange passiveness. At first he seemed hardly to understand the full meaning of the disclosure. When he had taken it in, he hung his head as if ashamed, and without offering any comment, stole out of his mother's presence. Wearing a dazed, surreptitious look, he went on through the rooms which formed the princess's quarter of the castle, and calling his favorite dog to accompany him, made his way round by a back staircase to Maximilian's apartments. Here he was interrupted, as Johann had been, by the vigilant Karl, but the prince brushed him aside. "I want to see my cousin," he said. "I know all about it. My mother has just told me. I will see that you are not blamed." And Karl, not daring to oppose physical resistance, the lad thrust his way past him into Maximilian's cabinet. He found the king seated at a table with a map of Franconia spread out before him, into which he was sticking pins with various colored heads. Maximilian looked up and smiled pleasantly at his cousin's entrance. "Why, Ernest, how is it that you have come in so quietly? Surely there is someone outside." "Yes, Karl Fink is there, but I told him to let me pass." The boy stared strangely at his cousin, and added naively, "What are you doing with those pins?" Maximilian was rather amused by the lad's coolness. "Look here, and I will show you," he said. "You see these pins with red heads? They are to mark all the large towns and villages. The small blue pins show where there are railways running already, and these yellow ones I am using to mark out the routes where I think there ought to be new railways made." "But why?" "Because I have found out that there are a lot of men in my kingdom who have no work to do, and I want to give them a chance of earning their bread, and at the same time benefiting the country at large by giving the farmers better means of sending their produce to the markets. You see, Ernest, a king ought not to spend all his time in enjoying himself, as I have been doing till lately. He ought to study the wants of his people, and care for them." The boy regarded him with a puzzled air. "But is this really true?" he asked doubtfully. "Are these things really for what you say? I thought perhaps they were only things to play with." Maximilian laughed. "I see you have a very poor opinion of my character for business," he returned jestingly. But unfortunately I have found it does not do to be always playing, and you'll find that out too if you ever come to the throne." He stopped and fidgeted for a moment under the boy's steady, disconcerting stare. His nerves seemed to be affected by some influence in the atmosphere, and he shivered slightly. "Why do you look at me like that, Ernest?" he demanded petulantly. The lad's expression became gravely sorrowful. "Because I want to see what it is like to be mad." The end of chapter 20.
Chapter 21 of A Crown of Straw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Crown of Straw by Alan Upward. The blow falls. "I want to see what it is like to be mad." The word struck on Maximilian's ear, like the grinding crash of a collision upon the ear of a sailor, sleeping peacefully in his berth, far out upon the waste of waters. He sprang to his feet and confronted the young prince with terrible eyes. "What are you saying? Who taught you that?" Ernest recoiled, terror-stricken. "My mother told me of it," he blurted out helplessly, backing towards the door to secure refuge from the king's wrath. Maximilian struck furiously upon a gong. Karl rushed in, evidently in a state of alarm. "Take this boy away," said the king fiercely, "and send me Bernal here at once, and Johann Mark." Karl darted off, accompanied by Ernest, who, in his hurry to escape from his cousin's presence, forgot to call his dog after him, and Maximilian paced the room with frantic strides till the attendant returned. August was with him. "Herr Mark has left the castle," explained the agitated Karl. "He took a horse from the stable an hour ago, saying that it was on your Majesty's service, and rode away at a gallop." Maximilian tore at his hair. "Traitor! He has deserted me in the hour of need, after working my ruin!" he cried in the first moment. But on reflection he added, "Perhaps he has gone to get help. We shall see." Bernal affected to be ignorant of the cause of the king's excitement. "Has anything happened?" he inquired. "What is it that has disturbed you?" Maximilian glanced from his face to that of Karl and back again. The musician was unable to meet his eye. Karl, better used to hypocrisy, displayed the most genuine tribulation. "Auguste," said the king, speaking solemnly and mournfully, "you remember what I told you of the night I passed in prison in Mannhausen. The conspirators have gone on with their work. My aunt has joined them, and I have just learnt from Ernest that they are openly declaring me" it required an effort to bring out the word "mad. I adjure you," he added beseechingly, "in the name of our sacred friendship, to tell me whether you had any inkling of this." The man thus addressed shifted his position uneasily, and cast down his eyes. "I have had certain fears," he said in low, indistinct tones, "that if you drove the ministers too far, they would succeed in convincing the public that you ought not to be entrusted with the royal power. No doubt your refusal to proclaim these wretched meetings has been the last straw. Maximilian! Perhaps it is not yet too late. Give up this socialist and his wild ideas. You have not been the same man since he came." The king interrupted him with a gesture so imperious and so scornful that the musician fairly cowered beneath it. "And you whom I have loved as a brother, you to whom I have shown my inmost heart, you have deserted me. Sir, never dare to address me again in the name you have used. Henceforth to you I am the King of Franconia, and a stranger. You will leave my palace tomorrow, and you may take with you the 30 pieces of silver you have earned." Without attempting a reply, Bernal turned and went out of the king's presence. Maximilian turned to Karl. "And you, Karl, why should you be faithful to me? All my friends have betrayed me. Why do you not go and join them? Doubtless you will be rewarded well." Stricken to the heart, the wretched attendant fell on his knees before his master and began to sob. "See," said Maximilian, speaking aloud as if to some witness of the scene, "this poor youth, on whom I have bestowed neither titles nor honours, whom I simply fed from day to day and treated as some creature of a lower nature, he clings to me when all my friends and my ministers and my very kinsmen have cast me off. What have I done to deserve this poor fellow's faithfulness? Karl, if I survive this day as King of Franconia, you shall be made a count, and I will bestow upon you the motto, Only True." The miserable Karl cast himself grovelling at full length upon the floor. "No, no," said Maximilian, raising him gently. "Do not distress yourself so much for me, Karl. I have been a kind master to you, have I not? But you have served me well. You, at least, have nothing to reproach yourself with. Come, let us act. I will know the worst at once. Go instantly to the Chancellor, and tell him I command his presence, without a moment's delay." Karl bowed his head, unable to speak, and fled from the room. The king walked to an iron cupboard in a corner of the cabinet, unlocked it, and took out a golden circlet, which represented the crown of Franconia on all occasions, except the coronation ceremony itself. He placed the diadem upon his head, closed the cupboard, and seated himself at the head of the table, on which the map, with its party-colored pins, was still spread. There he sat, silently awaiting his doom. Maximilian's agony was not of long duration. The tramp of many feet was heard in the anteroom, the door swung back, and the Chancellor von Sigismark entered, clad in his official robes, and bearing in his hands a great parchment scroll, blazoned with the arms of the state, from the foot of which swung, by a silken cord, a huge round of wax stamped by the great seal of the Franconian kingdom. After him filed in solemn procession, nearly the whole of the members of the Privy Council, the only notable absentee being Count von Eisenheim, the distant kinsman of the king. The other ministers and high officers of state followed, and in the rear stole Princess Hermengarde, with August Bernal and a third figure, whose presence destroyed the last doubt in Maximilian's breast as to his fate, the sombre-coated court physician. "On your allegiance!" exclaimed the king, as the party filed in before him. "I order everyone except the Chancellor to retire." Not a soul obeyed. All cast looks at the young monarch, in which he read pity or horror. Without waiting, the Count proceeded to read from the parchment in his hands. "Whereas it has pleased Almighty God," the document began, "to afflict His Majesty, Maximilian Charles Leopold Joseph Marie von Alstolf, King of Franconia, Grand Duke of Thuringia and Swabia, Prince of Astolf, Marquis of Este and Ferrara, Count of Lecht, Meyer and Rostenbahn, Lord of Hollingen, Lord of Stern, Lord of Neustadt, Knight of the Orders of the Golden Fleece, etc., etc., with unsoundness of mind. Now we, the members of the Privy Council of Franconia, having received and considered the testimony of Hermann Kraus, Doctor of Medicine, physician to His said Majesty, and of Her Royal Highness, Hermengarde of Schwerin-Strelitz, Princess of Franconia, aunt to His Majesty, and of the illustrious Count von Sigismark, Chancellor of Franconia, and of Herr Paul Moritz, Minister of the Interior, Herr August Bernal, His Majesty's intimate friend, Karl Fink, His Majesty's confidential attendant, and divers others, do hereby pronounce His said Majesty to be incapable of governing, and whereas His Royal Highness, Prince Ernest Leopold Friedrich Hugo Marie von Astolf, heir presumptive to the throne, has not yet attained the age of 18, we furthermore hereby appoint Her Royal Highness, the Princess Hermengarde aforesaid, mother of the said Prince Ernest Leopold, to be regent of the kingdom until His Royal Highness shall attain the said age of 18, and we do hereby invest her with all the powers, rights, and prerogatives of His Majesty for such period, and entrust her with the custody of His Majesty's person. Done by the Privy Council of Seidlingen, this 5th day of June, 18. Wilhelm von Sigismark, Chancellor. Christian Silber, Clerk. The reading of this act was received in absolute silence, except when the Chancellor came to the name Karl Fink, when the king uttered a stifled cry, and glanced over the throng in search of his attendant. But Karl had slunk away, unable to endure the exposure of his baseness. The Chancellor, with several others of the council, had anticipated a fearful explosion on the part of their victim, and a body of guards had been ordered into the anteroom in case of any forcible resistance. But their apprehensions were disappointed. As the Count folded up his parchment, a strange, baffled, hunted look spread over the king's features. He gazed at the array of countenances before him with a sickly smile for one moment, and then, bursting into a vacant laugh, leant back in his chair and exclaimed, "Wolf! Wolf! Won't someone bring Wolf to me?" The dog, which had been left behind by Prince Ernest, crept forward at the sound of its name, and licked the king's hand. While these events were passing in the castle of Seitlingen, Johann was approaching the capital as fast as train could carry him. On his arrival at Mannhausen, the first sound that struck upon his ear as he emerged from the station was the voice of a newsboy shouting out the deposition of the king. The telegraph had been quicker than the train. Without giving a moment to rest or refreshment, he sprang into a carriage and drove off to the house of his old friend and comrade, Schwartz, the man with the red beard. Schwartz was completely taken by surprise at his appearance. Indeed, his manner was so embarrassed that if Johann's mind had been free to take in anything but the fate of the king, he must have perceived that something was wrong. "I have come here straight from Seitlingen," he burst out, without waiting for Schwartz, "to rouse the revolutionary party on behalf of King Maximilian. He is the victim of a vile plot, solely on account of his sympathy with us. They are scheming to depose him as a madman, though he is no more insane than you are." Schwartz listened coldly. "I was just about to go to a meeting of the Revolutionary Committee," he said. "You had better come with me." Johann eagerly assented, and as they walked along, poured into his companion's ear the history of the last few weeks. Schwartz heard him without vouchsafing any reply. The two men seemed to have exchanged natures. Still, Johann suspected nothing. The committee was assembled in a small private meeting place when they arrived. The chair was vacant, and Schwartz at once walked up to the head of the room and occupied it, leaving Johann by the door. The sullen, hostile looks of those present were the first signs that roused the intruder to a sense of what was coming. "The first business before us," calmly announced Schwartz, as soon as he had placed himself in the chair, "is the reading of the minutes of our last meeting." A sensation made itself felt through the gathering, and all eyes were directed towards Johann, as the secretary proceeded to read in a cold, metallic voice. This was the last item in the minutes. "Moved by Comrade Meyerbeer, seconded by Comrade Hurst, and carried unanimously, that Johann Mark be expelled from all further connection with the revolutionary movement, as a friend and favourer of monarchy." The Republican reeled beneath the blow. His first impulse was to rush from the meeting. But before the chairman could affix his signature to the fatal page, he gathered himself together and strode proudly up the room. "You have condemned me in my absence," he cried sternly. "Will you give me a hearing now?" The chairman, after consulting his comrades with a glance, bowed his head in token consent, and Johann, seizing the permission, launched forth into a full statement of all that had happened since his first meeting with King Maximilian. He wound up his harangue by reiterating what he had already told Schwartz as to the true nature of the conspiracy against the king, and implored those present to banish prejudice from their minds and come to the rescue of one who was about to fall in their cause. The meeting heard him out in perfect silence. Schwartz took it upon himself to reply. "Johann Mark," he said gravely, "we have been friends for years, and it goes to my heart to have to cast you off. But the cause is more sacred than friendship. We believe you to be sincere. We do not condemn you, as we might, to the penalties of a traitor, but you have gone over to the enemy, and henceforth there can be no more comradeship between you and us." Johann stamped his foot. "I know you," he exclaimed bitterly. "You talk of liberty and brotherhood, and yet you calmly stand by and see the sacrifice of the only king who ever showed himself ready to serve the cause of liberty and brotherhood. What are your real motives? Not love of the principles you proclaim so loudly, not love of the people, but blind hatred for a name." "Stop!" It was Schwartz, who raised his voice harshly over the angry murmur arising in the hall. "If you have been blinded and deceived, we have not. I know these Astolfs. I know this race of vipers. My daughter and her child were foully done to death by the father of this Maximilian. Their blood cries out for vengeance, and rather than stir 1 inch to save him from his fate, I swear to you that if he were here at this moment, I would strangle him with my own hands." A dreadful silence followed the dreadful oath. Johann, sick to his very heart, sank his head upon his breast, and went away out of the company and out of their communion forever. Henceforth he had nothing more to do in Mannhausen. If the king were to be delivered, it must be by his unaided efforts. He took his way back to the railway station at which he had so recently arrived, and as he walked along he saw, staring at him from every wall and hoarding, a proclamation prohibiting the revolutionary demonstration on pain of treason, and signed in the name of Hermengarde, Regent of Franconia. The following Sunday, armed troops patrolled the streets of Mannhausen and of all the principal towns in Franconia. In some places, the proposed demonstrations were abandoned altogether. In others, the revolutionists gathered, only to be charged, ridden down, and bayoneted by the soldiery. Many were killed, hundreds were taken and thrown into prison, there to await the sternest penalties of the law. The whole revolutionary movement was extinguished as if by a breath, and the Regent's government received the applause of the civilized world. End of Chapter 21, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, May 17, 2024. Chapter 22 of A Crown of Straw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Crown of Straw by Alan Upward. A Royal Madman. The Regent, Hermengarde, sat in her former apartments giving audience to Karl Fink. She had not transferred herself to the royal suite, as Maximilian still occupied it, under the guardianship of Dr. Kraus and Karl himself, pending her decision as to his future place of confinement. The demeanor of the attendant showed that his communication to the princess had been of the gravest nature. His mistress, however, maintained her customary frigid calmness. "You were perfectly right to acquaint me with this," she was saying, "but on no account must you mention it to anyone else, not even to the physician. At the same time, it is only what might have been anticipated. The late king's fate is an instance. Perhaps it is truer mercy to the unhappy young man to wish that he might find some such release from his wretched state. At all events, I shall not attach the least blame to you if the worst should happen. It will be my care to find you another post where your merits will be rewarded." Karl bowed, with a shudder which he was unable to conceal from the searching eyes of the princess, and silently withdrew. Hermengarde gave a deep breath and looked as if some care had been removed from her mind. Then she turned to a private writing table and proceeded slowly to compose a letter to the Kaiser. Several days had elapsed since the overthrow of the king. During this time she had been busily employed. In the course of some of her numerous interviews with the Count von Sigismark, he had presumed to refer, in guarded terms, to the coming betrothal between Prince Ernest and his daughter. Hermengarde, however, had met these allusions by insisting on the impropriety of pressing on the affair while Maximilian's misfortune was still fresh in the public mind, and the Chancellor had appeared satisfied. Neither of them had ventured into the presence of their victim since his deposition from power. Hermengarde received daily reports as to his condition from Karl, and the Chancellor from Dr. Kraus. The privy councillors had not yet left the castle. But there was one thing of which Karl had failed to inform his dreaded mistress. That very morning, as he was strolling by himself in the lonely part of those beautiful grounds, in which Maximilian had looked forward to enjoying so much happiness, a figure suddenly glided out from behind a tree and stood before him. It was Johann. The ex-conspirator had succeeded in evading the Nubian sentries, and, making his way into the valley by night, over the mountains, had been lurking in the neighborhood till he could obtain an opportunity of accosting Karl alone. Ignorant of his recent expulsion from the secret society, Karl still dreaded him 1 degree more than the princess, and dared not refuse his demand to be privately admitted to the presence of the imprisoned king. As soon as night had fallen, he led in Johann by a secret postern which had been designed by Maximilian for his own use, and ushered him, with every precaution, into the royal cabinet. The sight of the change which had passed over the young man, whom he had last seen in the pride of health and beauty, the cynosure of an attentive court, struck Johann to the heart. He rushed forward and fell on his knees for the first time before the discrowned monarch. "My king! My royal master! Look at me! It is I, your faithful Johann Mark." Maximilian thrust aside a mass of grey tangled locks, and turned a dull gaze upon the man whose voice had reached his ears. "Ah," he said, "it is you. I wondered where you were. Go to my aunt, the Princess Regent. She will take you into her favour like the rest." "No, no, sire. Do not speak to me like that. Do not think me a traitor. I have been away trying to organize a rising in your favour, but now I have come back to rescue you." "Fool, fool, I say," answered Maximilian. "I have no rewards to give you. Why should you be more stupid than the others? They were wise enough to leave me. Von Sigismark, August, Karl, all of them have gone. Why should you stay here?" Johann struggled to maintain his composure. "Your Majesty breaks my heart when you say such things. Can you not believe in me? I have come here by stealth. I know a secret path over the mountain by which we may escape together. Disguise yourself and come with me, and we will make our way to some distant land where your enemies cannot reach you." The king gravely shook his head. "No, you do not understand. Have they not told you? I am mad. Where can a madman find refuge? I am better here among my faithful friends." Johann rose to his feet, his eyes flashing indignantly. "I do not believe it, sire. You are not mad, or if you are, then so am I too, and I will share your fate." Maximilian also rose, and touched Johann with his finger, as if to assure him that he was there in flesh and blood. Then he smiled mirthlessly. "Why, no, my friend, you are right. I am not really mad, but you see that they all think so. The Chancellor thinks so, and so does August. He was my greatest friend, you know, and I could not expect strangers to think better of me than he does. He was a great musician. Did you ever hear his opera, The Vikings?" Johann did not know how to answer. His breast heaved with painful emotion. Maximilian thrust an arm through his, in the old familiar way, and led him to the window. The chamber was situated on the side of the castle which overlooked the lake, and the dark waters, glittering with reflected stars, rolled up to the very foot of the wall. "Look," said the king, in a tone of restrained exultation. "There is my refuge. I can escape when I like, you see." "But there is no boat there," said Johann, trying to give the best meaning to his master's words. "I do not want a boat, Johann," was the reply. "They would see me if I escape from them in a boat, and follow after, and bring me back again. When I escape, it will be by a way so secret that all their spies will not be able to track me, and all their guards will not be able to bring me back." A long silence followed. Johann began to try and form some fresh plan by which to aid his unhappy master. Presently the king's manner changed. His form seemed to collapse. He withdrew his arm and crept back to the chair on which he had been sitting before. Johann followed him respectfully. "Is there anything I can do for your Majesty tonight before I leave you for a short time?" he asked. "I want to see my cousin Ernest," was the response, muttered in sullen tones. "They will not let me see Ernest, though he is my heir." "Your wishes shall be obeyed, sire. I will have Prince Ernest sent here." He passed out into the anteroom, where Karl was waiting anxiously. The physician had gone elsewhere for a time, and Karl was in solitary control. "Go at once to Prince Ernest and bring him here. The king wants to see him," commanded Johann. Karl knew the character of the man he had to deal with too well to attempt excuses. All he ventured to say was: "It will be difficult to manage, and I may be some time. Who will guard the king?" "I will. I will stay here till you return, and as soon as you have brought the prince, you shall let me out by the way I came in." Before going on his errand, Karl ventured a question. "What do you think of His Majesty's condition?" "That is a subject which I will not discuss with you. Do what I tell you, or—" The traitor did not wait to hear anything further, but hurried off. In half an hour he returned conducting the young prince, who appeared thoroughly frightened. "Do not be afraid," said Johann kindly to the lad. "The king wishes to say something to you, that is all. You will find him very gentle, but he is unhappy. Try to soothe him." With these words he pushed the prince inside, and followed Karl to the private outlet. As soon as Ernest found himself in his cousin's presence, he uttered a cry of astonishment. Maximilian had employed the half hour which had just elapsed in attiring himself in the complete trappings of his royal station. He had put on the ermine robe, thrown the collar of the golden fleece around his shoulders, girded on the sword of state, and grasped the golden sceptre in his hand. In this pomp he received his young kinsman. Overawed by this extraordinary display, the prince was about to fall on one knee before his cousin, as he had been accustomed to do on occasions of great ceremony. Maximilian checked him. "Do not pay homage to me, Ernest," he said sadly. "No one does that now. I shall not be king much longer. I have sent for you to tell you that. You are my heir, and when I am gone, you will wear these ornaments and sit on the throne of Franconia." "Oh, cousin Max, I cannot bear it!" and the poor boy began to weep. "You need not cry, Ernest. You cannot help me. You have not plotted against me and bribed my friends and servants. You have not spent the moments when my head lay on your breast in calculating how to betray me. You have not watched me from day to day for something which you might seize upon to carry to my enemies as a symptom of insanity. If you gave me food, I should not spit it out again in secret for fear it might be poison." The boy's eyes grew large with horror. "What do you mean? Poison?" he cried. "Yes, but have no fear. They will not poison you. But when you are king, Ernest, do not forget your people. That is a crime for which you will deserve to be punished as I am. Rule them, Ernest, but rule them yourself. Let no ministers come between you and them and usurp your power from you. Govern them justly but kindly. If they make complaints, listen to them. If they have just grievances, redress them. Let no wrong be done with impunity in any corner of the land. Trust no reports from others. See with your own eyes and hear with your own ears. Remember that you are but the first of servants after all. Try to make your people happier. Do not be content with mere submission. Do not wait till discontent grows dangerous. Study their problems, find out their needs beforehand. Above all, love them, Ernest, and they will love you, and no traitors will ever dare to conspire against your throne and tear your crown from you like this." He wrenched the diadem roughly from his head and made as if to cast it on the floor. But a new impulse suddenly coming to sway his mind, he strode up to where his young cousin stood trembling and speechless. "Take it, it is yours. See, I crown you Ernest V of Franconia." And he thrust the circlet forcibly down upon the lad's brow. "No, no, take it away!" cried Ernest wildly. "It hurts me." "Why, so it should," returned Maximilian grimly. "Did you think crowns were pleasant things to wear? It will hurt you more presently, Ernest. It will grow red hot, and sear a mark upon your forehead that will never wear away." "You frighten me. I do not know what all this means. I feel something inside me as if my head would burst." "Why, there again, that is one of the symptoms, Ernest. You are an Astolf, too, poor child. Your mother forgets that. But you must have these other things as well. The crown is not enough." And with the excitement mounting in his brain, The king tore off collar and robe and sword belt, and thrust them almost by force upon the resisting boy. He finished by placing the scepter in his hand, and then knelt down upon one knee before him. "Hail, your majesty! Now go and show your subjects their new king." "Max, cousin Max, I feel ill. Something is the matter in my head. Am I going mad?" "Mad? Why not, Ernest? We are all mad, we Astolfs. It is in the blood. We inherit it with our kingdom. My father died mad, so did yours. What matter? They have not found you out yet as they did me. Hide it, Ernest. Be cunning. Cringe to that old fox von Sigsmark. Marry his vain daughter, and he will never pull you down." The boy gave a wild laugh. "Gertrude? I hate her. They shall never make me marry her. I would rather go mad than do that." Maximilian laughed too, and clapped his hands. "It works! It works!" he cried frantically. "The poison in the crown works. I knew it would." Suddenly the wildness left him. He crouched down, shuddering, and raised a finger to his lips. "Hush! I hear someone. It is a doctor. Be careful. We must try and deceive him." And he shrank down again in his seat. The door was opened, and Dr. Kraus came in. He glanced round, and his eyes fell upon the young prince in his strange masquerade. He turned sternly to the king. "What do you mean by this, sire? These things must be taken from you if you play such tricks. Be good enough to take them off, your Royal Highness," he added, speaking to Ernest, "and come back to your apartments." And, after helping the dazed lad to rid himself of the royal insignia, he took him by the hand and led him out. The king walked towards the window. End of chapter 22, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, May 13, 2024.
Chapter 23 of A Crown of Straw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Crown of Straw by Alan Upward. Hermengarde's Triumph. As the door of the cabinet closed, leaving Maximilian by himself, with the ensigns of his monarchy strewed upon the table and the floor, the clock of the castle began to strike 10. Before the notes had finished, a solitary horseman came riding swiftly down the road which formed the main approach to the castle. He had come through the guarded gateway on the crest of the hill without a check, all the sentinels having presented arms as he went silently past them at full speed. He pulled up his reeking horse at the steps leading up into the castle and dismounted alone. At this moment a loud splash was heard in the lake, followed by a solitary cry. Immediately the great doors were opened with a clang, and a crowd of servants and guards came running out, with torches in their hands, and shouting confused directions to each other. They streamed down to the margin of the water, the lights tossing above their heads like banners as they went. Here they scattered, some searching up and down the edges of the lake, while others tumbled hastily into the boats which lay moored along the marble quay and pushed themselves off from the shore. The torches gleamed fitfully, first in the air and then in the dark mirror of the water, as the boats glided to and fro, with a noise of oars and every now and then a muttered direction from men standing up in the bows. Over all towered the high wall of the castle, its lighted windows showing out brilliantly against the gloom of the night, and the casement of one window was open and flapped slowly overhead, like the wing of some huge bird of prey, and moaned. Finally there was a subdued shout. The wandering lights on the water gathered together in an awfully narrow ring about one point, and one of the boats tilted slightly, as some weight was slowly dragged in over the side. Then the boats came back, rowing heavily to the shore, and from the foremost boat a burden was lifted and laid with reverence upon the bank. The stranger, who had stood watching all this time, uncovered his head, and stepped forward to look at the dead body. Then he solemnly crossed himself and went on his way into the castle. By this time a new misfortune had befallen Johann. Hardly had he left the precincts of the castle when he ran almost into the arms of two soldiers who were aimlessly straying through the gardens. He was quickly recognized, and the pair at once took him into their custody and carried him before the chancellor, who ordered him to be detained in strict confinement. The news of his arrest quickly spread, and it was not long before it reached the ears of Dorothea. She at once sought the presence of the Princess Regent. During these last few days a secret estrangement had sprung up between Hermengarde and her favorite. Though without any true idea of the princess's share in the fall of Maximilian, Dorothea could not help perceiving that her patroness was to some extent hostile to the poor king, and the confidence she had formerly felt in her friendship had received a great shock. The absorption of the princess in the cares of her new situation had kept them apart a good deal, and when they met, the girl could no longer greet Hermengarde with the same frank affection as before, and Hermengarde, on her part, shrank more into herself, and no longer indulged in the occasional touches of tenderness by which she had won Dorothea's heart. But on the present occasion all these restraints were brushed aside. Dorothea rushed in and fell kneeling before her mistress, crying, "Madam, Johann has come back, and they have made him a prisoner." The stern features of the regent were irradiated by a smile of a softness rarely seen there. "Have no fear, my child," she said soothingly. "Did I not tell you that whatever happened, I was your friend?" And lifting her up, she sounded a gong for the page, whom she dispatched with strict orders to have Johann brought before her at once. "And now," she said, turning to Dorothea, "I have something to say to your cousin which I do not wish you to hear. Go into my bedroom while I receive him." Dorothea went through a door behind the princess, still too much moved to be able to express her gratitude in words. She had scarcely disappeared when the outer door opened and admitted Karl. His face told the princess all. "Maximilian is dead?" she said. "Yes, madam. He threw himself out of the window of his room into the lake. His body is being dragged for by the soldiers." Hermengarde crossed herself. "Go and tell the chancellor that I desire his attendance immediately." The awe-struck wretch departed, and she sank down upon a seat, a prey to the most conflicting emotions. The arrival of Johann Mark disturbed her reflections. He was accompanied by 2 guards, whom the princess haughtily dismissed. "Herr Mark," she said, "we have never met before, but I have reason to think you regard me as your enemy. Nevertheless, I have sent for you to tell you that you are a free man. The chancellor will be here immediately, and I shall direct him to make you out a free pardon for everything which may have been laid to your charge." The prisoner gazed at her in bewilderment. Was this the woman whom everyone regarded as the embodiment of selfishness and unscrupulous ambition? "Madam, I must tell you," he said at length, "that if you release me, I shall renew my efforts on behalf of the king." Hermengarde gravely shook her head. "King Maximilian is no more. My son is now king of Franconia." Johann broke down, and the princess allowed him time to recover himself, watching him soberly the while. "I do not wonder at your emotion," she said. "I wish that my son might have such friends." "But why, madam?" asked Johann, as soon as he could speak. "Why do you show me this unexpected kindness?" "I do it at the request of your cousin, Dorothea," was the answer. "She has a deep affection for you. I do not know whether it is returned." "It is indeed. was the warm response. "Ah, madam, since you are so good as to interest yourself in Dorothea, may I entreat you to watch over her here? Her father is not fit to have charge of her." "I know that. But have you never thought of taking his place by a dearer right?" "Madam, I will confess the truth to you. Such an idea never came into my mind till the other day. I was even guilty of urging her to accept the offers of the king. When she refused finally, she admitted to me that it was because she loved another. And then, for the first time, a light seemed to strike into my own heart, and I found out, too late, that I loved her myself." Hermengarde's sombre face relaxed once more. "Foolish young man," she said softly. "Did you never think who it was that had won your little playmate's heart?" The young man started. A joyful glow broke out over his features. The princess went quickly to the bedroom door and opened it, and brought forth the blushing Dorothea. "Here is your cousin, child. He has not yet found out whom it is you are in love with." One look between the two was enough. They were folded in each other's arms. The princess detached a string of magnificent diamonds from her neck. "Here is my wedding present," she said, casting it round the young girl. "Now go, and if you sometimes hear evil things said of Hermengarde of Schwerin-Strelitz, remember that she was your friend." And bestowing a last kiss upon Dorothea's cheek, she pushed them out of the room. The chancellor came in directly afterwards. He found the princess in her most haughty mood. "You have heard of my nephew's sad fate," she said briefly, "and you are no doubt making all the necessary arrangements for the proclamation of my son?" "I am, madam." "While I remember it, I desire you will at once make out a full and complete pardon for Johann Mark. I have ordered him to be set at liberty." The chancellor ventured to remonstrate. "Are you aware, madam, of the serious character of this man?" "Yes, sir, I am. But I have found a remedy for all of that. He is now my very good friend." Still the chancellor faintly objected. He could not so soon forego his vengeance on the man who had done so much to thwart him. "Your Royal Highness bears in mind the consequences of the unhappy event which has just taken place. There will have to be, of course, as a matter of form, a fresh appointment in regard to the regency." "Of course, and in regard to the chancellorship, too, I presume," retorted Hermengarde sharply. "In the meantime, we both hold our offices, and if it is my last act as regent and your last act as chancellor, I order you to make out this pardon." "You shall be obeyed, madam," replied the count, and he kept his word. Secure in her son's accession, Hermengarde now thought the time was come to throw off the mask she had worn so long. "There is another consequence of this event which your loyalty will no doubt be quick to recognize," she said. The chancellor bowed, as one who knew what was coming. "I refer, of course, to my son's marriage. As King of Franconia, this is now a matter which has passed out of our hands, and we must be prepared to sacrifice our private wishes to the interests of the state." "Quite so, madam. I anticipated that you would be compelled to take this view, and it does not find me unprepared. I may before long have the honor of soliciting your Royal Highness's favor for a marriage between my daughter and Herr Moritz." "I shall be much gratified to be present at it," replied Hermengarde. "I have some reason to hope, I may tell you privately, that the Kaiser may be induced to bestow one of his sisters on the king." Used as he was to court duplicity, the count could not repress a slight grimace at this cool intimation. "An admirable arrangement," he said, preparing to withdraw. "But as you have said, madam, this matter has now passed out of our hands." As soon as he was gone, Hermengarde rose and proceeded to seek out her son in his own rooms. At the door of the sleeping room she was stopped by an attendant who said, "His Majesty is asleep. He has been unwell, and the doctor has given the strictest orders that he is not to be disturbed." Hermengarde showed some slight alarm. "I hope it is nothing serious," she said. "I believe not, madam." "Well, I will not disturb him. Send the doctor to me." She returned thoughtfully towards her own room. On the threshold she encountered Karl. "Well, has the body been found?" "Oh, yes, madam. But pardon my asking, does your Royal Highness know that the Privy Council is in session?" "The Privy Council? Without my authority? Take me there at once." Karl led the way, heartily cursing himself for having played so blindly into the hands of the princess. At the door of the council room, the guards would have stopped her, but the imperious woman literally thrust them aside and forced her way into the room. The whole of the councillors staying in the castle were present, but there was one addition to the number assembled on the last occasion, a man whom Hermengarde had never seen before. Tall, dark, with iron-grey hair, and an expression of the most profound melancholy on his countenance. He sat in a chair at the head of the council table, with the old chancellor on his right hand, and had just finished affixing his signature to a parchment when the princess burst in upon them. At first this personage clearly failed to recognize the princess, but the chancellor leant over and whispered in his ear. He at once rose, the other councillors following his example. "Come in, madam," he said gravely. "We were about to send to desire your presence. Will you take that seat?" And he pointed to one near himself. "What does all this mean?" demanded Hermengarde, disdaining the proffered seat. "I do not know who you are, sir." "My name is Frederick von Astolf. You have perhaps heard of me as the Count von Eisenheim." Hermengarde turned pale and gazed blankly around her. Still she preserved her wrathful tone. "I presume you have a right to be here, as a privy councillor, my lord. But why has the council met without my authority?" The Count von Eisenheim turned to the chancellor with a glance signifying a desire that he should answer the question. Von Sigismarck eagerly complied, and his voice had in it a ring of a long suppressed resentment. "It is my duty, madam, as chancellor, to call the council together on a demise of the crown in order to proclaim the new sovereign. In this case, moreover, we had also to appoint a regent." "Well?" It seemed to Hermengarde that she could scarcely breathe. "The council has proclaimed your son king by the style of Ernest V, and it has declared his Royal Highness Frederick Leopold von Astolf regent." Hermengarde's eyes flashed with fury. "Be careful, sir. Be careful, gentlemen. By what right have you passed me over?" The chancellor again gave the answer. "By the family statutes of the House of Astolf, and by the Franconian constitution, the regency goes of right to the next heir to the crown. It would have been illegal to appoint you, madam." The princess began to realize the bitter truth. She had been completely outwitted by the servile courtier. He had been preparing this blow from the very first. "Enough," she said with some dignity. "I will not say more to you now. In 2 years my son will take the government into his own hands, and then your authority will be over." "I fear not, madam." It was the regent who spoke, and Hermengarde, looking at him, saw the deep mournfulness on his face assume a new and dreadful significance. And then, before anything could happen, She was aware of the presence of the tall, spare figure, clad in its long black coat, the sight of which, walking across the gardens of Neustadt on a memorable morning, had fallen like a blight upon Maximilian's heart. And she reeled back and sank bereft of spirit upon the ground with the slow, deliberate words beating like hammers upon her brain. "Madam, the king, your son, is mad." End of chapter 23. Read by Gila, Labinger, Freeberg, Napa, June 2nd, 2024.
Chapter 24 of A Crown of Straw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Stacey M. A Crown of Straw by Alan Upward. Epilogue. When the curtain falls on a tragedy in real life, the actors do not take off their dresses and depart to other scenes. They linger upon the stage, and those who care to do so may watch the slow settling down of the passions that once led on to the catastrophe. Most of the characters in this story are still alive. Johann and Dorothea are married and dwell together peacefully in an ancient German city. The ardent reformer keeps to his old ideal, but his methods of working for it have greatly changed. He now believes that till his fellow countrymen are of one mind as to the value of freedom, it is idle to try and thrust a republic upon them by force, and that when they are of one mind, the republic will come of its own accord. He has founded a newspaper in which he preaches his social gospel in language sobered by the experiences he has gone through. The Count von Eisenheim still holds the regency, but old von Sigismark is no longer chancellor. His daughter's persistence has caused him, not very willingly, to resign in favor of her husband, who is now the Baron von Moritz. The musician Bernal has recently produced his great opera, the Jomsburg Saga, into which he has introduced a touching allusion to Maximilian's fate. It has been received with applause throughout Germany. In the same room in the castle of Seidlingen, from which its builder took his fatal plunge, Ernest V. of Franconia drags out his existence. Over him the court physician and a number of attendants, chief of whom is Karl Fink, maintain a surveillance which is never broken. Twice in every year he is visited by a gray-haired woman who passes through the ranks of the servants, closely veiled, but with a step which still retains some of the stateliness that once distinguished the Princess Hermengarde. When the visit is over, the stricken mother returns to her lonely home in a distant corner of the kingdom, where she lives under the name of the Countess Wallstatt, and bestows the larger part of her revenues upon the poor. The only pleasure she permits herself is the occasional society of Dorothea, who generally brings with her a little girl named Hermengarde, with flaxen hair and big blue eyes, who sits on the elder woman's knee and shyly accepts her caresses. Only one name is never mentioned between the two friends, and Dorothea will never know the entire truth concerning the fate of Maximilian, whether he was in reality mad, or whether he was only deemed so by the brief-lived swarm that infests God's glorious creation and remakes God in its own image, and sets up the standards of its own blind limitations, and proclaims them to be the laws of life. He has outsoared the shadow of their night, envy and calumny, and hate and pain. The end. End of chapter 24. End of A Crown of Straw by Alan Upward.